The morphine was wearing off when I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling against the cracked screen. 3 days post-surgery, and the titanium plate in my hip felt like it was grinding against bone with every movement. I opened our family group chat and typed the words no parent should ever have to. Surgery went well. Can someone pick me up tomorrow? Discharge is at 2 p.m. The message sat there for what felt like hours. Those little red receipts mocking me in blue. Then Donovan, my eldest, finally replied, "Sorry, Dad. Celeste has her yoga retreat this weekend. Maybe try an Uber?" Before I could even process the sting, another bubble appeared from Celeste herself. "Honestly, Thaddeus, you'd probably be more comfortable staying another few days. The house is finally peaceful without all the complications." Complications. That's what 32 years of sacrifice had become to them. I stared at the sterile ceiling tiles, counting the holes in each square, trying to understand when I'd become such a burden to the son I'd raised alone after his mother died. The son I'd put through law school by working double shifts at the aircraft manufacturing plant. The son whose wedding I'd paid for, whose house down payment I'd covered, whose wife's student loans I'd quietly settled without ever asking for thanks. The nurse found me like that an hour later, phone still clutched in my arthritic hands, staring at nothing. "Everything all right, Mr. Pemberton?" she asked gently, adjusting my IV with practiced efficiency. "Fine," I managed, though we both knew it was a lie. Just making arrangements. What I didn't know then, sitting in that antiseptic room with machines beeping their indifferent rhythm, was that my son and his wife had been making arrangements of their own. Arrangements that involved my name, my credit, and documents I'd never seen. But that very night, when they settled in with their wine and turned on the evening news, they would see something that would make their blood run cold. They would see my face on their television screen, and they would realize that sometimes the person you abandon has more fight left than you ever imagined. The storm they'd created was about to find its way home. The Uber driver who picked me up from Mercy General was a soft-spoken woman named Rosa who helped me into her car with more gentleness than my own family had shown in months. "Hip surgery?" she asked, adjusting her rearview mirror to keep an eye on me. "Replacement," I said, settling carefully into the seat. 30 years of factory work finally caught up with me. She nodded knowingly. "My father had the same thing. You have family helping you recover?" I watched the hospital shrink in the side mirror and found I couldn't answer. Instead, I gave her my address. Not Donovan's sprawling suburban home where I'd been living for the past year, but the small apartment I'd kept as backup. The place Celeste always called unnecessary overhead during her unsolicited financial advice sessions. The apartment felt smaller than I remembered. Dust motes dancing in the afternoon, light streaming through windows I hadn't opened in weeks. On the kitchen counter sat a stack of unopened mail, and something about seeing my name, Thaddeus Pemberton, printed on envelope after envelope made my chest tight. When had I stopped being a person and become just an administrative burden? I lowered myself into my old recliner, the one Celeste had repeatedly suggested I donate to Goodwill, and finally allowed myself to think clearly. The timeline was obvious once I stopped making excuses. The sudden invitation to move in with them last year, right after I'd mentioned the inheritance from my brother's estate. Celeste's newfound interest in organizing my financial paperwork. The way Donovan had started handling my banking to make things easier. My phone buzzed. A text from Donovan. "Hope you made it home safe. We'll check on you in a few days once things settle down." A few days. I stared at those words until they blurred. This from the boy who once cried when I had to work late shifts, who used to call me his hero. Now I was someone to be checked on like a leaky faucet or a plant that might die if ignored too long. I'd given them everything, and somehow I'd become nothing. But as I sat in that quiet apartment, surrounded by the remnants of my real life, something shifted. The fog of disappointment began lifting, replaced by something sharper, clarity. The call came from my old supervisor, Hugh Morrison, 3 days later. I was still moving like a rusty gate, but the pain medication was finally allowing me to think straight. "Thaddeus, you ornery bastard." Hugh's gravelly voice boomed through the phone. "Heard you went under the knife. How you holding up?" "Still breathing," I said, grateful for a voice that actually seemed pleased to hear I was alive. Good. Listen, Channel 12 is doing a story on the plant closure. 25th anniversary of when Morrison Aerospace went belly up. They want to interview some of the old-timers. Your name came up, Morrison Aerospace, where I'd spent 3 decades precision machining parts for commercial aircraft, where I'd earned my reputation for catching manufacturing defects that could have killed people, where I'd learned that details matter, that sloppy work has consequences, and that sometimes you have to speak up even when it's uncomfortable. What kind of story? I asked. Human interest piece. How the shutdown affected families, what happened to the workers. The reporter? Diana Walsh. She's good people. Said she particularly wanted to talk to you about the whistleblowing thing. The whistleblowing thing. That was Hugh's understated way of referring to the time I'd documented safety violations that the company tried to bury. My reports had eventually led to federal investigations and saved lives, though it had made me unpopular with management for years. I don't know, Hugh. I'm not exactly television material these days. Bullshit. You look distinguished. Besides, people need to hear about workers who actually gave a damn about quality. When's good for you? I glanced around my sparse apartment, at the stack of unopened mail, at the silence that had become my constant companion. Tomorrow afternoon works. When Diana Walsh arrived the next day, she was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes and the kind of direct handshake that told you she didn't waste time on pleasantries. Her cameraman set up in my living room while she asked about my 30-year career, about the plant closure, about what it meant to be a quality control inspector. But it was her final question that caught me off guard. Mr. Pemberton, you were known for your attention to detail, for catching problems others missed. Do you still apply those skills today? I looked directly into the camera. Every day, Ms. Walsh. Some habits never retire. The segment aired that Thursday at 6 o'clock. Diana had edited it beautifully. My weathered hands holding precision instruments. My voice steady as I explained how a single miscalibrated bolt could bring down an aircraft. The story painted me as a man who dedicated his life to protecting others through meticulous attention to detail. My phone started ringing before the credits finished rolling. The first call was from my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, congratulating me on being on TV. The second was from a former coworker I hadn't spoken to in years. By the third call, a pattern emerged. People from my past were proud to know me. They remembered me as competent, reliable, someone who cared about doing things right. It was the fourth call that changed everything. Dad? Donovan's voice was tight, controlled. We saw the news segment. You didn't mention you were doing an interview. Didn't think I needed permission, I said carefully. It's just, Celeste thinks it might not be the best time for media attention. With your recovery and all. People might get the wrong impression about your situation. My situation. I'd been hearing a lot about my situation lately. What kind of wrong impression? A pause. Then Celeste's voice in the background. Tell him about the credit monitoring alert. My blood went cold. What credit monitoring alert? It's nothing serious, Donovan said quickly. Just some routine financial activity that got flagged. Probably a clerical error. But until we sort it out, maybe it's better to keep a low profile. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment and did what I'd trained myself to do for 30 years. I looked for the problem everyone else was missing. I started with the stack of mail I'd been ignoring. Bank statements, credit card offers, insurance paperwork, all the mundane debris of modern life. But as I opened envelope after envelope, discrepancies began emerging. A credit card I'd never applied for. A home equity line of credit showing recent activity. Investment account statements for accounts I'd never opened. All in my name. All with addresses I'd never lived at. My hands, the same hands that had once detected microscopic flaws in aircraft components, began trembling as the scope of the betrayal became clear. This wasn't carelessness or confusion. This was systematic fraud. I spent the next morning at the kitchen table. Documents spread out like evidence at a crime scene. 37 years of quality control had taught me to organize problems systematically. And this was definitely a problem. 3 unauthorized credit cards, 2 investment accounts, and a home equity line for 85, 0 sesh, all opened within the past 8 months. all since I'd moved in with Donovan and Celeste. The doorbell interrupted my forensic accounting. I hobbled to answer it, expecting maybe Mrs. Chen with another casserole. Instead, I found Diana Walsh holding a coffee carrier and wearing the expression of someone who'd stumbled onto a bigger story. "Mr. Pemberton," she said, "I hope I'm not intruding, but I got a call from the credit bureau this morning. Apparently, your television appearance triggered some kind of fraud alert on your accounts." I stared at her. "How do you know about that?" "I don't, officially, but I have a source there who flags identity theft cases involving seniors. Your name came up." She held up the coffee. "Can we talk?" 20 minutes later, Diana was photographing documents while I explained the timeline. She took notes with the focused intensity I remembered from my days documenting safety violations. "This is sophisticated," she said finally. "Someone with legal knowledge set this up. The addresses are all registered to mail forwarding services. The account applications use your social security number but different phone numbers. Professional level stuff." "My son's a lawyer," I said quietly. She looked up from her notepad. "I see." Before she left, Diana gave me a business card for someone else. Evelyn Restrepo, consumer fraud attorney. She works a lot of elder financial abuse cases. "And Mr. Pemberton?" She paused at the door. "That thing you said about habits never retiring? I think you're going to need those skills." Evelyn Restrepo arrived that afternoon like a small hurricane in a business suit. She was maybe 45, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She spent 2 hours reviewing my documents, making occasional notes in handwriting so precise it could have been typeset. "Mr. Pemberton," she said finally, "this is textbook financial elder abuse. The good news is you caught it relatively early. The bad news is prosecution requires proving intent, which means we need more evidence." "What kind of evidence?" Her smile was sharp as a scalpel. "The kind that shows a pattern. The kind your quality control background is perfectly suited to find." Evelyn taught me to think like an investigator instead of a victim. "Financial predators leave trails," she explained during our second meeting. "They can't help themselves. The key is knowing where to look." She'd brought reinforcements, F. Fander, a forensic accountant named Jasper Vance who specialized in family financial fraud. Together, they walked me through the process of requesting records, filing complaints, and documenting everything with the methodical precision I'd once applied to aircraft components. The scope of the theft revealed itself slowly, like a developing photograph. The home equity line wasn't just open, it had been used. $47,000 withdrawn over 6 months, ostensibly for home improvements to a property I'd never owned. The investment accounts had been systematically drained, funds transferred to accounts I couldn't trace. But it was Jasper who found the smoking gun buried in property records. "Your name is on a deed," he said, sliding a document across the table. "Some kind of quit-claim arrangement. Looks like you gifted your interest in your brother's estate to a trust controlled by..." He checked his notes. "Donovan and Celeste Pemberton." I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It looked like mine, but I remembered every document I'd ever signed, and this wasn't one of them. "That's not my signature," I said. Evelyn leaned forward. "Are you certain?" I pointed to the T in Thaddeus. "I've been signing my name the same way for 68 years. The crossbar always extends exactly 3 millimeters past the vertical line. It's a habit from technical drawing. This crossbar is wrong, too short, wrong angle." Jasper grinned. A quality control inspector to the end. The next discovery came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen knocked on my door that evening holding a manila envelope. "This came to my mailbox by mistake," she said. "Your name, but my address. The mail carrier has been mixing things up lately." Inside was a bank statement for an account I'd never seen, showing regular deposits from something called Pemberton Holdings, LLC. According to the paperwork, I was apparently the sole owner of a company that managed rental properties. Properties I'd supposedly purchased using the home equity line and my brother's estate funds. On paper, I looked like a real estate mogul. In reality, I was a man who'd never owned anything more valuable than a 20-year-old Honda Civic. Evelyn's voice was grim when I called her. "This is bigger than elder abuse," she said. This is organized fraud with tax implications. We're looking at federal crimes now. That night, I sat in my recliner looking at the evidence spread across my coffee table. My son hadn't just stolen from me. He'd turned me into an unknowing accomplice in a complex financial scheme that could have destroyed both our lives. The boy I'd raised to understand right from wrong had somehow convinced himself that stealing from his own father was just good business. The confrontation came sooner than expected. I was reviewing bank statements with Evelyn when my phone rang. Donovan's name on the screen made my stomach clench, but I answered anyway. "Dad, we need to talk." His voice had an edge I hadn't heard since he was a teenager caught in a lie. "Can we come over?" "We?" "Celeste and I. There are some misunderstandings that need clearing up." Evelyn nodded when I looked at her questioningly. She mouthed the words speakerphone and pulled out a small recording device. They arrived within the hour. Donovan wore his court suit, the one I'd helped him buy for his first job interview, while Celeste carried a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They looked like attorneys coming to negotiate a settlement, not a son and daughter-in-law visiting a recovering parent. "Dad," Donovan began, settling onto my couch with calculated casualness, "we understand there might be some confusion about your financial arrangements." "Confusion?" I kept my voice level. "Is that what we're calling fraud now?" Celeste's composure cracked slightly. "Uncle Thaddeus, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The accounts were set up for tax purposes. Estate planning, very common in families with significant assets." "What significant assets?" "My Social Security check and the $12 in my savings account." Donovan leaned forward, switching to his lawyer voice. "Dad, your brother's estate was substantial. The trust structure we created maximizes the benefits while minimizing tax liability. Everything we did was legal and in your best interest. Without my knowledge, using forged signatures." "Not forged," Celeste said quickly. "You signed power of attorney documents when you moved in with us. Remember? For your medical care?" I did remember those documents. What I was beginning to understand was that I probably hadn't read them carefully enough. "Show me," I said. Donovan exchanged a glance with Celeste. "The originals are in our safe deposit box, but you have copies in that portfolio," I interrupted. "Show me." Celeste reluctantly slid a folder across my coffee table. Inside were documents I vaguely remembered signing, but the language was dense, full of legal terms I hadn't understood at the time. Buried in subsection C of the third page was language granting them authority over all financial matters related to estate planning and asset management. I'd signed away my financial independence, thinking I was just ensuring they could talk to doctors if I was unconscious. "This is a broad power of attorney," I said. "You used it to open accounts in my name. To protect your assets," Donovan insisted. "Dad, you're not getting any younger. What happens when you can't manage your own affairs?" "We were being proactive." "By stealing from me?" Celeste's mask finally slipped. "Stealing? You were living in our house, eating our food, using our utilities. The equity line covered those expenses plus medical costs insurance didn't handle." The room fell silent except for the quiet whir of Evelyn's recording device. Diana Walsh's follow-up story aired the following Tuesday. She'd titled it, "When Family Becomes the Enemy, Elder Financial Abuse in Plain Sight." The segment opened with my face filling the screen, but this time I wasn't discussing aircraft manufacturing. 3 weeks ago, we featured Thaddeus Pemberton as an example of American industrial integrity. Diana's voice narrated over footage from our first interview. Today, Mr. Pemberton's story illustrates a different kind of precision, the meticulous documentation required to uncover financial fraud committed by the people he trusted most. The camera showed Evelyn's office, documents spread across a conference table like evidence in a courtroom. Diana's reporting was surgical in its precision. The forged signatures, the unauthorized accounts, the power of attorney abuse. She interviewed Jasper about the sophistication of the scheme, and Evelyn about the legal remedies available to elder abuse victims. But it was the final segment that hit hardest. Diana had somehow obtained courthouse footage of Donovan entering the federal building downtown, briefcase in hand, surrounded by reporters asking about his father's allegations. "No comment," he said, pushing through the crowd. This is a family matter being blown out of proportion. The story ended with my face again, sitting in my apartment with Mrs. Chen's casserole cooling on the stove behind me. The investigation continues, I said directly to the camera, but I want other families to understand something. Love doesn't excuse theft. Being family doesn't grant permission to forge signatures or steal identities. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you need protection from most. My phone started ringing before the credits finished. The first call was from a woman in Phoenix whose daughter had done something similar. The second was from a man in Detroit whose son-in-law had cleaned out his retirement accounts. By midnight, I'd received calls from 17 different people sharing their own stories of family financial abuse. The next morning brought a knock at my door. A young man in a cheap suit held up a badge. Mr. Pemberton? Agent Rodriguez? FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We'd like to discuss your case. 2 hours later, Agent Rodriguez had copies of everything Evelyn and I had compiled. He examined the forged signatures with a magnifying glass, photographed the power of attorney documents, and made detailed notes about the timeline. This is a solid case, he said finally. Wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, federal crimes with serious penalties. Are you prepared for what comes next? What comes next? Your son and daughter-in-law will be arrested. There will be a trial, media attention, family relationships destroyed permanently. He looked at me seriously. Some people prefer to handle these things privately within the family. I thought about Donovan at 5 years old, crying when I had to work overtime. I thought about walking him to school, teaching him to drive, watching him graduate law school with tears of pride in my eyes. Then I thought about lying in that hospital bed, begging for a ride home, while they counted my money in another room. Agent Rodriguez, I said, arrest them. The arrests happened on a Thursday morning. I wasn't there to see it, but Diana Walsh was, her camera crew capturing Donovan and Celeste being led away in handcuffs from their suburban home. The footage played on the evening news with a chyron reading, local attorney charged in elder fraud scheme. Evelyn called me immediately after it aired. How are you holding up? Better than I expected, I said. And it was true. Watching justice unfold felt like completing a quality control inspection. Systematic, necessary, and ultimately satisfying. The legal proceedings moved faster than I'd anticipated. Faced with the evidence Evelyn and I had compiled, Donovan's attorney advised him to accept a plea bargain. Celeste, however, chose to fight the charges, apparently convinced that her charm and legal background would sway a jury. She was wrong. The trial lasted 3 days. I testified on the second day, walking the jury through each forged document, each unauthorized account, each lie wrapped in legal terminology. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Catherine Morse, had me explain how my quality control training helped me identify the discrepancies. Mr. Pemberton, she asked, when you discovered these forgeries, what was your primary concern? That my son had learned to accept sloppy work, I said. In my industry, cutting corners kills people. In families, cutting corners kills trust. Celeste's attorney tried to paint me as a confused old man who'd forgotten giving permission for the financial arrangements. It was a mistake. When he suggested I might not remember signing the documents clearly, I asked the bailiff to bring me a magnifying glass. This signature, I said, pointing to the forged power of attorney, shows hesitation marks in the pen strokes. The person who wrote this was copying my signature, not writing it naturally. The tie crossbar is 2.3 millimeters too short and angled at 12 degrees instead of 15. After 40 years of technical drawing, those measurements are muscle memory. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Judge Patricia Henley asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood slowly, my replacement hip protesting, and looked at Celeste for the first time since the trial began. Your Honor, I said, I don't want revenge. I want restitution and acknowledgement. Financial crimes against elderly people succeed because we trust our families to protect us. When that trust is betrayed, it doesn't just steal money. It steals dignity, security, and faith in human decency. I paused, looking at the packed courtroom. My son will serve his time and hopefully learn that some shortcuts destroy more than they create. I hope other families learn from our tragedy. Celeste received 18 months in federal prison. Donovan, having accepted the plea bargain and expressed genuine remorse, received 12 months and was disbarred. The money was recovered. All of it. But some things, once broken, can never be fully repaired. Prison changed Donovan. I could see it in his face during our first visit 6 months into his sentence. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen since he was a child. Caught breaking something valuable. Genuine shame mixed with desperate hope for forgiveness. "Dad," he said through the plexiglass divider, "I don't know how to start apologizing for what I did." "Start with the truth," I said. "Why did you do it?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. At first, it felt like good financial planning. You had assets sitting idle while living expenses kept mounting. I convinced myself I was being responsible, protective, and then it became easier to keep taking than to admit what I'd already done. Every month, I told myself I'd pay it back before you noticed, but the amounts kept growing and he looked up, eyes red-rimmed. I became someone I don't recognize, someone who leaves his father in a hospital bed begging for a ride home. The words hit him like a physical blow. "God, Dad." That night, we were celebrating the equity line approval while you were recovering from surgery alone. "What kind of person does that make me?" "A person who made terrible choices," I said. "The question is what kind of person you choose to be now." The visits became regular. Weekly, then twice weekly. Slowly, conversation moved beyond apologies to something resembling the relationship we'd once had. Donovan was reading again. Philosophy, ethics, books about redemption and forgiveness. He'd enrolled in the prison's legal aid program, helping other inmates with appeals and family law issues. "I can't practice law again," he said during one visit, "but I can still use what I know to help people who can't help themselves." Celeste was different. Her single visit was brief and bitter. She blamed me for not understanding their financial planning, blamed the media for sensationalizing the story, blamed the prosecutor for being overzealous. She never once accepted responsibility for her actions. "I won't be contacting you after my release," she said. "This whole situation has been traumatic enough." I nodded. "That's probably for the best. The real healing came through work." Agent Rodriguez referred me to a nonprofit that helped elderly fraud victims navigate the legal system. My quality control background and recent experience made me uniquely qualified to help others identify financial schemes and document evidence. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I volunteered at the Senior Protection Center, teaching people my age how to spot forged signatures, recognize suspicious financial activity, and protect themselves from family members who viewed inheritance as an early Christmas present. The key, I'd tell each new group, is documentation. Predators count on victims being too embarrassed or too trusting to keep records. Don't let shame make you an easy target. Mrs. Chen started attending my workshops. "You're famous now," she said after one session, "but still the same careful man who checks his mail twice." Donovan was released on a Tuesday morning in March. I picked him up myself, driving the same Honda Civic that had somehow survived our family's financial chaos. He looked smaller, wearing clothes that hung loose on a frame 20 pounds lighter than I remembered. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. "But we're family. That still means something." I'd spent months preparing for this moment with a counselor who specialized in financial abuse recovery. She'd helped me understand that forgiveness didn't require forgetting, and that rebuilding trust was measured in years, not gestures. "I found an apartment near the community college," Donovan said as we drove. "I'm going to teach paralegal courses while I figure out what comes next." "Honest work," I said, and meant it. The apartment was small but clean, furnished with thrift store finds and church donations. It reminded me of my first place after the Navy, sparse, functional, and truthful about its limitations. "I have something for you," he said, producing a manila folder. Inside were handwritten letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me but never sent. I wrote one every week during the trial in prison, trying to understand what I'd become. I read them that night. The early letters were full of self-justification and blame-shifting, but the later ones, written from his cell, showed genuine growth. He wrote about inmates abandoned by families, about his cellmate's elderly mother who still sent money despite repeated theft. "I see you in her," one letter read. "The kind of parent who loves beyond betrayal, beyond common sense. I don't deserve that love, but I'm grateful it exists." The Senior Protection Center offered me a coordinator position. The work was fulfilling but emotionally draining. Each new case reminded me of my own naive trust and family loyalty. Still, helping others navigate similar betrayals felt like completing the circle. "You've helped dozens of people recover stolen funds," Diana Walsh said during a follow-up interview. "How does that feel?" "Like quality control," I said. "Find the defects, document the problems, prevent the same failures from happening again." Some relationships could survive betrayal if both parties committed to honest rebuilding. Others remained permanently damaged. Cautionary tales about trust's limits. Celeste had moved to another state after her release, never contacting either of us. Sometimes cutting losses was the healthiest choice for everyone. Our new relationship was careful, tentative, built on weekly coffee meetings where we discussed his students, my advocacy work, anything except the 18 months that had nearly destroyed us both. "I know I'll never be the son I was before," he said during one of these meetings. "Good," I replied. "That son made terrible choices. I'm more interested in the man you're becoming now." It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was something more complex. Acknowledgement that people could change, that families could rebuild on honest foundations, that love could survive even calculated betrayal if coupled with genuine accountability. The hip replacement had healed completely. The family trust remained a work in progress. 2 years later, I stood before a joint legislative committee, addressing lawmakers about elder financial abuse prevention. The packed room included advocates, families, and legislators who would vote on bills strengthening penalties for financial crimes against seniors. "Financial abuse of elderly Americans isn't committed by strangers," I began. 70% involves family members who view their relatives' assets as early inheritance. The solution requires education, documentation, and the courage to prosecute financial crimes regardless of family relationships. My testimony helped pass legislation closing loopholes that enabled family financial fraud. The precision-oriented approach I'd developed during 40 years of quality control had proven invaluable in crafting effective legal protections. In the audience, Donovan sat quietly in the back row. He attended these speeches sometimes, witnessing the positive impact growing from our family's destruction. His teaching career was progressing well. Excellent evaluations, recent promotion to department coordinator, small steps toward redemption. After the hearing, Diana Walsh interviewed me for what she called the epilogue to our story. "Looking back," she asked, "do you regret pursuing prosecution instead of handling this privately? When I was a quality control inspector, I could have quietly fixed defective parts and shipped them anyway. Easier, less disruptive, but those parts could have killed people. Family financial abuse kills something too. Trust, dignity, faith in our closest relationships. And your relationship with your son now? We're building something new, not the same trust, that's impossible, but something more honest, based on accountability rather than blind faith." The camera captured what Diana later called the most quotable moment of her series. "Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. Healing doesn't require pretending the injury never happened. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we love most deeply. The key is learning the difference between love that enables and love that demands better." That evening, I reviewed documents for a new case. A grandmother whose grandson had stolen retirement savings for cryptocurrency investments. Mrs. Chen brought dinner, our established routine. "You looked official on television," she said, setting down dumplings. "Just quality control," I replied, and she laughed at my familiar phrase. My phone buzzed with a text from Donovan. "Watch the hearing online. Proud of the work you're doing. Thanks for showing me what accountability looks like." I responded, "Coffee Saturday? Wouldn't miss it." For the first time since that hospital day, those words felt completely trustworthy. Outside, the city settled into evening. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new families destroyed by greed disguised as love, new opportunities to transform tragedy into protection for others. I opened my laptop and began typing my weekly report. The work continued, one case at a time. Quality control never ends. It just finds new applications.